and welcoming our guest speaker, Sabrina Ratte. But first, I do want to just thank everyone. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for having attended the symposium this week, those of you who've had the opportunity. I've had a blast. There's been so many students, faculty, and staff joining us to really benefit from an amazing lineup of guests, and I just think it's been a thrilling week. So thank you to everyone who's come, everyone who's presented, and also to people who've helped out. I see some of my colleagues from the Humanities department here. Colleagues have been helping also from multimedia and other departments. We have had so much support throughout the college. I particularly just want to give a shout out for the very last talk to the Faculty of General Education in Kelly Purdy's office. I want to thank the Indigenous Student Center also for helping out, the VCSA, that's you guys, actually for helping us, and the VCTA, the Teachers Association. So just acknowledging that, like, although I've been organizing this, there's been a lot of people behind me. I also want to acknowledge that we are meeting here together in the traditional unceded territories of the Kanakahaga people, and I think it's important to recognize that this is a place which we are on sometimes by sheer luck, and that other people actually lost their rights to this place because we're here. To sort of recognize that imbalance and maybe open up in our everyday life a desire and some actions to form a greater justice and a better relationship with Indigenous peoples. With that in mind, I would like to turn to our guest, Sabrina Ratte. Sabrina Ratte is a digital artist who works and lives here in Montreal and also in Paris. She's had exhibits all over the world. She's an international art star. Yes, she is. She has had exhibits in Shanghai, in Tokyo, in LA, in New York, here in Montreal, and in Paris. She works with blending different art forms, virtual reality, digital art, and she's going to be working in the near future also with integrating AI. And she's going to be talking to us about cyberdelia and how art, the art she works on, looks at how our digital worlds, because we're all having cell phones in our hands. Actually, I'm going to ask you to take your cell phones out of your hands and actually put them in your bags, because they're too much part of our world, and I want you to be paying attention to her. But we do live so much in a world that's mediated by our digital experiences. So her art is trying to reflect the digital aspects of our perceptions, and if you want, the natural way that we look in the world. Without further ado, please help me welcome Sabrina Ratte.
Thank you so much for this great introduction. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to present. Okay. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's the first time I have the occasion to speak to college students. It's pretty amazing. And I'm also very much interested in that theme of this symposium, which is what is real, because this is such an important question, and it's a question that can be addressed in so many ways, in so many perspectives. And obviously, as an artist and also as an individual, this is a question that is actually at the heart of my practice and at the heart of my everyday life. So it was interesting for me to revisit, let's say, all of the presentation I'm going to give you and look at all these. I'm going to show you some of my work so you have an idea of what I create, but in that perspective of what we consider as real. And I think what we consider as real is key, like the word consider or perspective. In any case, that's what I'm interested in, because the word reality is very vast, and it's also very subjective. So one day you might consider something very real, but like months later you won't even remember that reality and you'll be somewhere else completely. So that shifting in what we consider real is also something that I'm interested in. And of course, I work with digital art, with digital tools, so softwares, photogrammetry, like 3D scanning of objects. I always work, through that screen. And this made me think a lot about also materiality, the physical world, versus the digital or virtual world. And, that dichotomy, like creating these images that feel almost like we could touch them, but they're always behind that screen, so we don't have access to them physically. Does that mean that they're not real? Again, I think I would say there are no answer to this question, or at least no absolute answer. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because reality is a little bit, like what's the truth? And truth is also a very complex concept, because there's no absolute truth, but we all have our truth, and that truth can change. So with this in mind, I'm going to show you a little bit of my work and reflecting on this, to me, very philosophical question and very essential question. I'm going to start with this quote, because I am reading this book. I just started it yesterday. And as I mentioned, that question of real and virtual is always in my work since the beginning. And it still is. Now I'm still researching, because it's like a never-ending question. You never get to find the answer. There are no answer. But I thought this quote was interesting, especially today, as we work and live through the virtual more and more, and our relationship with nature, with our body, with the sensuous, is more and more, let's say, we're more and more separate from it. We live a lot in our head, and at least I will speak for me. So this is something I want to address more, also questioning these way of experiencing the real. So I'm going to read that quote. Please forgive my accent sometimes. So direct sensuous reality, in all its more than human mystery, remains the sole solid touchstone for an experiential world now inundated with electronically generated vistas and engineered pleasures. Only in regular contact with the tangible ground and sky can we learn how to orient and to navigate in the multiple dimensions that now claim us, sorry. So there's a lot of things I like about this quote, especially I like the expression electronically generated vistas. I just like it, it's beautiful. And engineered pleasures. This hybrid between technology and something that is so ingrained in our nature, like pleasure, or the idea of vistas, looking at this landscape, but the landscape electronically generated, which is basically what I do as an artist. And also navigating the multiple dimensions that now claim us. And I think this is, this was written in '97, but it's still, and maybe more than ever, accurate. We are being asked to navigate so many dimensions now. And as we, interact more and more in the digital realms and, social medias, we get in contact with so many minds, so many opinions, so many perspectives on reality. And we need to navigate that and, trying not to lose our foundation, our repère, where are we in all these realities? So I think this is that idea of direct sensuous reality, and when he speaks about more than human mystery, he also speaks about nature and, just being in relationship with nature, like forest, animals, life, which is more than human, it's something, that's where all the magic is. And we have to stay enchanted by these realities also and experience it in our body. You know, like as we live through the virtual, we kind of make abstraction of our body to project our mind inside this world, this digital world. But maybe, you know, there is something in being grounded in our body in order to maybe explore further into that digital realm without being lost. So that's kind of my introduction. And I also wanted to mention, there is this film, Solaris, might be a bit hard. It took me a while to really understand it. I mean, it's a very slow film, but it's so beautiful, and it's a masterpiece of science fiction. Andrew Tarkovsky is, you know, one of the most like respected and profound filmmaker out there. And when I watched this film, I guess my life changed. And I think this film really embodies our, you know, that question of what is real. And when I think of reality, I also think of subjectivity and our way to understand and interpret reality. And so what's real for us is, you know, what we've learned through our own personal experience and that we project onto the world. So when, for example, you enter a room, maybe you feel the atmosphere, the ambience. Maybe it reminds you of an experience you had when you were a kid. So you will color that room with all these experiences, and you will have emotion in this room. But somebody else would come in the same room and experience it in such a different way. Maybe for this person, it's like a traumatic experience to get into that room, where for you, it's such a beautiful, you know, nostalgia feeling. So all this in mind with Solaris is this idea of another planet, which is a huge ocean. And these humans go there and try to understand, like, what is this ocean? What is it communicating to us? And eventually, like, continents start to appear, and each character in the movie starts to see it materializing their fear or somebody they've lost, or you know, so it's like this ocean is materializing the projection and the experience of each character. And I think that's quite fascinating. And what it says, I think, in a big, let's say, in very large interpretation, like very fast, is that reality, even though if we go and look for something unknown, like another planet, what actually is happening is we recreate the reality we know, because that's so ingrained in us. So all of that we can see is something that we already know, even if we are in the unknown. So all these questions are really, really profound, and I think it's so rich for, you know, in a creative perspective. And they definitely feed all of my process and as an artist. And so when I started working with digital image, I actually started with electronic images. So, you know, like video feedback, which you can see here, where you just, you know, use a camera and film itself inside of a screen. So it's like this feedback loop. And it creates these beautiful, shapeless, colorful signals. Sometimes it looks like water, sometimes more like light and geometrical forms. And to me, this is really related to what we just saw with Solaris, you know, with that ocean that takes form under your own projection, where you can materialize your vision. So this is kind of like an abstract signal, abstract material, which is electricity, but I can shape it into landscape, into images, into colors. So it's really magical in a way. And it's a way for me to, you know, kind of materialize my own perspective on reality. So there's something there that has always been with me. And of course, these signals I've been using them to do some live performances with musicians. And there is this question also about the real here, because yes, we can argue these are all images, and on the other side of the screens are projections. But when you are in this concert room and the screen is so huge, and then this light, these movement influence people's action or influence the ambience of the room, and is creating energy, you know? So there is something real about images that we should not, you know, deny. It does have an impact on how we act and how we think, how we see the world. And so these are just, you know, GIF animation from my videos. These are all actual videos. So it's just to give you a little idea of how it moves. But if ever you want to see more, it's all on my website, sabrinaratte.com. And so these are like example of videos that I was doing at the time with video synthesizers. So this is, you know, electronic signals. But then with electronic signals, I was like kind of creating this perspective and faking a three-dimensionality in the image. So a little bit like painting, and I totally perceive working with these electronic signals as painting, but painting with light, painting with electricity. And I could, you know, fake this three-dimensionality through, you know, perspective or light, like shades of light, like gradient. So different strategy to give us the impression that we can step inside the image. And I think this idea of stepping inside an image is so everywhere, because since we live in so many images, sometimes we maybe don't even realize we are maybe more living into these images. You know, when you watch a movie or look at a painting or photograph, you kind of imagine yourself being there. And the same with architecture, actually. When I started creating these images, I was also being more and more interested in architecture. And, you know, architecture is everywhere, of course, but also in the digital world, in the virtual reality. And I was really asking myself, like, how different is it to feel a space in your body, like here, or to project yourself in this virtual world where you can navigate, you know, through headsets, for example. And these are two different dimension or level of reality. And I believe both are very real. So that's when I started integrating like 3D animation into my work. I was really scared to dig into this because these are very complex tools, but it's so rewarding because then I could really create like more complex architecture and create these worlds, which probably some of you, you know, have experienced through video games. It's similar techniques in a way, but I use it as more as like imaginary world with no goal to have like, you know, go on next level, but it's more like a way to contemplate another kind of reality. And so these are just other different iteration of my work more recently. And now I started working with 3D scans. So it's very kind of simple technique now because of our phone. But you can have this app for free on your phone, and then let's say you like this office, so you can scan it with your phone, and it becomes a 3D models, and I can import it into my software. So this is also, for me, my interaction with what we consider real and the material world, because then I get to scan physical objects and import them into my world, and then transform it and appropriate this object and change it. I always, when I do that, I think a lot about, you know, you probably have seen maybe the movie Tron. I'm thinking of the first one, but I imagine in the second, like the remake, there's still this idea of, you know, when the character is being scanned and then thrown inside the video games. It's basically the same thing that I'm doing, but with objects. So yes, so just quickly, like some project more in, so I can show you more, like more specific projects. So for example, Machine for Living is a project about architecture, and where I visited all of these amazing utopian architecture around Paris, where I was living for 5 years. And so I took photographs of the facade. So these are real, facade of real buildings. But then I posed them on this 3D virtual structure, so that we feel like they're all kind of in the same world. And to me, that's also another way to appropriate reality and bringing it into my digital world. And then bring this to another level. I create installation work where each of these imaginary building inspired by real building are projected on screen, and we can walk around like as if we were in a real architecture setting. So there's this level of reality, but and then I created that 3D structure, but that I 3D printed, or in this case was constructed based on my 3D model. So it's the real structure physically, but then I projected the facade on it. So that there's this level of the physical world meeting the projected image, and all of these dimensions or levels of reality meeting each other and dialoguing. So as you can see, it's very much ingrained into my work, this question of what is real, what do we consider real, and how do we experience each of these dimensions. This is another example, which is kind of a odd, different approach in my, let's say, work in general. As I mentioned earlier, like for me, electronic signals and digital signal was like painting with lights and painting with electricity. So I was like, well, why not just go explore this and try to give that impression that it's real painting. I know this is not, completely convincing, but that was the idea of like, how can I make painting with video, but painting in motion? So I wanted that there is this concept of time into these images. So it's like, again, this digital reality that is simulating painting. And the question of simulation is also a very fascinating concept, which I'm not going to go so deep into, because there's a lot of philosophers that have thought about this concept of simulation. But, we've all seen The Matrix or questions like that, which films like that really questions, our perspective on the reality. And then the beauty of digital art and video art is that it's not physical. So you can adapt it to so many contexts, and it has so much potential to be deployed in the space, or to be like here, I've presented it inside this sculpture. And again, so this very much physical structure where you have these digital images that are kind of acting like, how do you say this, holograms. So you're not sure, I don't know if we see, but there are some panels that were iridescent glass. So when you move around, the colors of the video changes, and you also see reflections of the video in it. So it feels like you see the videos in other cubes, but it's not there, in fact. And so it's very much a sculpture where you walk around it and you see different things depending on where you stand in the room. And to me, this is kind of a metaphor also for our relationship with the real, because when your position in space, but also your position in society, where you grew up, how social class or your identity as a person will completely change your perspective on the same reality. So I'm interested in this, multiple views of one reality, and what's an illusion, what's a projection, what's something maybe that feels more real. So I do that, but through, kind of formalist approach. Here is another example of, this is like digital architecture. So this is all digital. It's not a photograph. So it's like a painting. But then I had the chance to actually materialize this painting into the real space when I did this big solo show in Paris. And I could work with actual people who can build things. Because for me, it's a very scary world, the physical world, because I live so much in the virtual, but I'm fascinated by it. And I also want to bring my virtual world into this physical world. So I'm always like in that liminal space between the physical and virtual, and how to bring one into the other and the other into the one, kind of navigating both of these spaces. And so here you can see that from the image I created, there is this roof and like this kind of door, like patio door, that we recreated in reality. So in the physical reality. So it felt like you could enter the image and continue this idea of wanting to cross on the other side of the screen. And then now I'm going more into this idea of 3D scan. And as maybe you might have noticed, there are no human bodies in my work so far. I've worked a lot with the idea of architecture and virtual spaces, but the people in it are actually the spectator, the viewer, so that we can ourselves project ourselves into this environment. But then I kind of challenged myself. I was like, okay, let's use a body, let's use someone, and I actually used myself. And with the help of my friend, we did a 3D scan of my body, and I bring my own body, so just like Tron, into that virtual world. And I imagined different characters, if you want. And these are I consider them it's not me anymore. It's like another version. These are cyborg goddesses. So you might see I'm inspired by Greek mythology, but also the body as architecture or as a sculpture, and how to deform and deconstruct the body. But this is also very much about subjectivity. So each of these goddesses, cyborg goddesses, have their own perspective on reality, and these are their, the world they live in, if you want. This is how they project themselves inside of their world. So just like in Greek mythology, there's the goddess of war or goddess of love. Well, you can interpret as you wish. Of course, probably this one is a goddess of architecture, maybe the goddess of nature. But they're kind of stuck in their own subjectivity, but all together they become this whole world. So they all reflect one perspective on a bigger reality, if you want. I'm not sure how long I've been talking, so I don't know if you want to keep me on tracks. It's all good. So more and more we're getting into the present time. So now I feel like with Floralia in 2021 is really the beginning of where I am now. So I started thinking about, questions around, I think during the pandemic, a lot of us had questions, had time to reflect more in depth about philosophical questions, existential questions, what is real, but also, what kind of world are we building? What's Anthropocene? What is happening with, our Earth and our environment? And how can I address this question through my art? without, falling into that super stressful, apocalyptic view that we all are doomed, and also not being like overly optimistic, technology will save us, or being in denial, like this is just not happening. Like, what kind of attitude should we have when we're facing that reality? Because this is definitely a reality. So I did a lot of readings, and I thought a lot about these questions, and I think this really changed my perspective on reality, and it opened me up to much more wider questions, about human beings, about what it means to be alive. What is life? Which is another question we could bring inside the what is real. So for this project, Floralia, I was in the country, and I started scanning plants and trees and flowers all around me, things that we take for granted, like roses or trees. And then I'm reading a lot of science fiction too. And one of these science fiction book talks about the idea that one day we would all live on hard drives. So we would not have anymore like a body anymore. We would digitize our mind and live into this virtual reality all the time, which is, to me, quite fascinating. Sounds like both utopia and dystopia, like a total nightmare, or also everything is possible. So like some of those characters, for example, they're like, I don't want to feel gravity anymore. I don't want to have a human body. I can be just like a triangle. Like everything's possible. And in this book, they're talking about the archive of everything that was on Earth once that you could access. So this like huge archive, all human knowledge into this virtual archive. So that was a big trigger for my imagination. And I was like, what if, one day roses have disappeared, and trees and ferns, things that we take for granted today, And if they disappeared, would they be archived? So these are kind of the future archive, like archive of a speculative future, where the reality we know now would have disappeared, and that would be our only contact with nature and these forms of life from the past. So it's very much a project also about time, which is in the future, the future past, which is the present, something like that. So kind of mixing all these temporalities. And so for this project, so these are 4 videos. And it totally like I mentioned, digital art can expand into space. So I did like a wallpaper with 4 screens. I did some super immersive environment with it. That was in Tokyo, in Japan. Everything is possible with digital art. But for this project in particular, it really made sense to go and do a virtual reality project with actual headsets where you can go in that archive and look at those plants from close up and move around them, actually control how fast they explode and recompose themselves. So it made sense also because of one of my inspirations mentioned that we would live in this digital world without body. So when you experience virtual reality, you don't have a body in that world. Like if you look down, you don't see your feet, you don't see your legs. So it's, again, a very interesting experience, like back and forth between physical reality and virtual reality. So this is just like a quick excerpt of what you see when you're inside that world. So you can just teleport yourself with, you see that kind of. Sorry, I don't have the word for it. So, and the closest you go to the plants, louder you hear the sounds where the plant was evolving when it was alive, you know. So it's like you can go inside the intimacy of that plant. And it does have this very realistic look, but it's also completely abstract and not realistic at all. And that leads me to the next project, which was, you know, commissioned by Hermès, which is a big like fashion house, but this was for watches. So I had to reflect around about concept of time, which is a highly subjective reality. You know how much like maybe right now time goes so fast because what I'm seeing is so interesting. But then afterwards, you're waiting on the bus, and you're like, it's been 2 minutes, but you feel like it's been 2 hours because, oh my God, it's long. You know, it's all about perspective and context. But I was also thinking time and space are very much interlinked, you know, and this is like, so I was thinking today, like how, you know, I want to see, this is like the Dead Sea. You can Google that on Google Map and get there and see what it looks like. And it feels like our Earth is getting smaller in a way because you can have access to all of these landscape and information. And so for this project, I literally took, let's say, the Dead Sea, and I could import that part into my software. So I could transform actual landscape into my own imagination, if you want. And imagination is very much a virtual reality as well. But it is a reality because it changes the way you perceive reality. That was just like a parenthesis. So yeah, so in a way, I'm using, these are kind of like 3D scan, but made by Google and satellite, more precisely, satellite information that Google take and do that thing called Google Earth. So for example, like this is in Iceland, and now you can see like it's very similar, but then I can construct, you know, imaginary landscape on top of it. So it's a way to, also another way to kind of interpret reality and bring it into my own world. And from there, I can use these signals that I've created and that I've used from the satellite data, and then make a sculpture. So this is like a 3D printed sculpture, which, you know, you might be familiar with 3D prints, which is like you're using the actual digital information that's being transformed into physical reality. To me, this is completely magical. And again, like I'm crossing the border between the digital and the physical. And on top of that sculpture, I also projected videos, so images. So we are again like in between the worlds of physical and virtual, light and matter. Yeah. So just maybe I can show it a little excerpt of all the videos. I made 12. So this is just like a little trailer, teaser. So this is like San Francisco, for example. This is Brasilia, Dubai. And then another project here is Objet Monde, which literally translates to world objects. How this project started was I was in very north of Quebec, you know, around Sept-Îles, and there were in the middle of the forest these cars, these abandoned cars. They look like from the 50s or 60s, you know, like super retro car, beautiful colors, and like how plants, they just, you know, started to grow around them, and they got really integrated inside of nature. And and to see this was like very, like such a powerful experience, because you're like, it's a mix of very, very strong and opposite feelings. Kind of like, this is like apocalypse, you know, it's the end of the world, but it's also so beautiful, like nostalgia, and nature coming back to it. And there's also something, you know, desolate, but kind of sublime. So I just, you know, give me a lot of food for thought and inspiration and emotional response. So without really knowing what I was doing, I started scanning these objects, like I mentioned, with my phone. So this is like how it looks like. Of course, I've added some lights and like focus, you know. But so this is the car in the 3D scan. And then just to talk about the title before I show you the actual project, it's a word, it's an expression that I've borrowed from a very famous philosopher called Michel Serres, and who's questioning, you know, what is an object? And yes, an object, it's easy. It's something you can hold in your hand, or, you know, that is in front of you, you can throw away. But then a world object would be something that is more, in a way, modern, because we've created these kind of huge object that actually becomes a reality. You know, like satellites that are all around us, or atomic bomb that actually can destroy the whole world, you know, if you want. Internet, like right now we are living inside like so many signals around us and we don't perceive them, but they are there. So that's also a reality. And so that question of objects that actually will live inside these objects was quite fascinating to me. And as I was starting to be more interested in the concept of garbage and trash and all these objects that we discard, I watched so many documentaries that, you know, we don't know what to do with all these garbage. There are so many. Like in Japan, they created an island out of all those garbage, on which there is like a biodome and like, you know, like when we put them underground, they continue on living, and all the rain that goes through that garbage go and pollute the soil. So these garbage are everywhere. We live inside of them. So I'm like, the garbage is definitely a world object. So that's how these cars became, you know, these kind of runes. I was thinking of garbage as architectural runes, like things that will live in the landscape forever, even after we are gone. And I was living in Marseille at the time, so there's a lot of garbage in Marseille because they do a lot of strike also. And so all the streets were full of garbage, so it was the perfect place to do that research. So all these computer screens and TVs, that's where I took them. And then you might recognize a little bit, I use the same technique that I use for Hermès and contextualize them into landscapes. But like, as if they were huge inside the landscape that we see from very far away. And this is like my second, but one of my first interactive installation, which means you can interact with the image with a little device, which is actually controlling time. And you can go fast forward, you can go backward, you can stop the image. And it's kind of a metaphor, you know, about how time can go really fast. The landscape will keep on changing, but these objects are still in there. And as human, we also have such an impact on, you know, with that question of Anthropocene, talking about like how our presence and our way of living actually changed the landscape. So there's also a reflection about how we have an impact on that reality. And this is just a little example of someone interacting with the piece. And then you can go really, really fast, and it looks like it's glitching, and then it switched to the other video. And so you go from night to day to sunset, sunrise. Right. And then finally, I'm just going to talk about my most recent project that I finished last year, and it's called Inflorescence. So it's in the same, continuation of my reflection about garbage and trash, but this time I wanted to reflect on e-waste, electronic devices like that we use so much. We all have so many of them. And as a digital artist, I use it so much. I was like, okay, then what does that mean to use all of these electronic devices? And of course, these are extremely difficult to recycle because they're so small. And, like I've seen documentary where, people just like burn them to get the metal inside of them, but this is like, they die so young because they breathe all these fumes. It's like a tragedy, really, what's happening with this. But then my approach to this question was kind of, projecting myself in this future where humans are not there anymore, because you know what, we're not the center of the world. And I'm reading right now, Lynn Margulis also, who's a microbiologist and who's been part of this reflection about the concept of Gaia, which is Earth that is alive. But it's a very scientific concept. It's not, about goddess and Greek goddesses. It's really that Earth in itself is an ecosystem that is alive, and each creature is interacting with each other to contribute to that aliveness, if you want. And she says in her book, like, Earth in millenars survived like millions of atomic bombs. It's not a problem, but of course, as human, it is threatening, because we, as a form of life, threatening our own existence. So then I was projecting myself, when could these objects become a source of life? And that's also another question, like between technology and nature, is this really two opposite questions? And we could argue that technology is something that we as humans create, and we are alive, and these technology are part of life evolution too. And so I was thinking, what kind of creature would, grow on these electronic device, maybe feed on the remnant of electricity in their circuits, and be like maybe half plastic, metal, and organic mushrooms, so kind of hybrid creatures between technology and matter and biology. And I think this quote also, reflect that question of what is real, because when we throw something away, it's not in our life anymore, so it feels like they disappear, but they don't, of course. But they disappear from our perspective of reality. And with this project, I also want to, kind of a reminder that this is a reality. It's not because you discard an object that it doesn't exist anymore. It keeps on having relationship with the landscape, with, our surroundings. And so this quote from a book that is a reflection about garbage say, some residues of our activities are referred to as waste, which is also already an interesting concept, with which it remains impossible to create a world. These leftovers compel us to complete a third nature and the forms of life that are capable of thriving within it. So you can tell that, that's exactly kind of what I wanted to do with this project. And, that question of not being able to create a world with our waste is something that I'm quite interested in. And so just give you an example of inside of my phone, when I scan these objects, this is a, it's like a photographs, but in 3D. So these were the actual object that you see in the videos. Discarded motherboards. This was a trash on Rue Beaubien in Montreal. Somebody gave me that amp that's not working anymore. And since this was like a residency I did in Germany in a cooking plant, I scanned something there that was very interesting visually. And so this is videos, but they also are sculptures. So I'm using these objects and kind of giving them a new life in a way, and with those LED lights that take signal from the video and kind of are metaphor for these strange creatures that would have evolved. And when I present this installation, like right now it's being presented in Belgium, and I will present it in Shanghai in a month. Of course, I'm not shipping these waste, so the concept is also to go in the recycling facility and go grab local e-waste to give them a second life. So it's a kind of way to recycle a little bit. So that's where I am right now, and now I'm working on new projects around. I'm starting a residency, an art residency at Sporoball, which is an art center in Sherbrooke, and it's all going to be about AI. So can't wait to delve into this, which is a whole other level of reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Sabrina. I can't tell you how you've just dazzled my mind. I'm sure some of us in the audience are just filled with questions for you. So I want to open up the floor. Who's ready to go first? I'll come right over to you with a mic. Yes. Could you show me your hand again? I lost you. I'm going to pass that down. You just pass that all the way down.
If you could become virtual reality, like become a hardware and just completely transform yourself into VR, would you?
So you mean if I become a hardware, not software? Okay. Wow, that's a good question. I mean, hardware would be more like a robot or a computer, and software would be more like Photoshop or something. But I mean, I've asked myself that question when reading about, the actual author of science fiction I mentioned was Greg Egan, and his book's called Diaspora. And it does feel appealing. Like in one of the chapters, there's this one girl who's an artist, and she can create all these landscape, from just thinking about them and recreate the whole context of where she evolves. And this is really beautiful. But to be quite honest, I think, and to go back to the first quote of this presentation, I think we need that grounding into our body. So I think I'm fine as I am now.
Another question? Anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry.
How do you feel about the AI art, the crisis there where AI is stealing artists' artwork to form other things? Like, I see your art style is very similar to what like an AI could generate. Are you worried about the effects of it?
Yeah, interesting. I know there's a lot of worries about this, and with reason. But I don't feel threatened that much. Maybe maybe I will. Maybe I should dig further. I don't know. But I know some artists that actually are doing interesting things around this question of rights, and like Holly Herndon, who's a musician. She created this app where it's like her voice. You can use her voice to sing anything. and it's free of use and no, completely open source. I find this very interesting. I think as artists, and that's kind of the attitude I will go into that residency next week, is we need to think, artists can do whatever they want. They don't have to do anything. It's like, but I find, for me, I want to find a creative way to engage with these questions. And I don't think fear is a good advisor. So I want to go in with a lot of creativity while being aware of these questions. I don't want them to be a stop to my, let's say, imagination. But maybe it is an interesting concept to use as a fuel to go further. I hope this answers your question.
Would you ever use animals to make art like that? Like a snake or something?
If I would use, I'm sorry, if I would use
If you would ever use animals, like maybe a snake, to be a model for some of your art.
Oh, like 3D scanning? That would be tricky because animals, they move. Maybe I have to make it asleep.
I was kind of like taking from like the Taylor Swift Reputation where the snake moves, like something like that.
I'm not sure I don't understand the reference.
Since I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, there's a part in her tour like where she introduces one of her albums and it represents like a snake.
Okay.
And the snake is like going on screen. Would you ever do something like that, but more in depth?
I don't think I would use, I don't know, I don't know. So far, it hasn't been in my ideas to use live animals. I'm definitely interested by live animals. Use them in, it's a good question. I don't know if, that sounds like complicated.
Any other questions? I guess I'll just ask a question. I think one of the things I found most interesting about your talk, and that's a high bar because I found a lot so interesting, was your fascination with garbage. Because it's counterintuitive to me to look at garbage or look to garbage for inspiration. So did that occur? And I notice you draw inspiration sometimes from books and a very philosophical, intellectual life. But you also, as you said, look to our natural world and to be grounded. So did that occur spontaneously when you were out and about and tripped upon some garbage, or was it more stimulated by your readings?
Good question. I tried to think about it. I think when I bumped into these cars in the forest, I think that was a huge eye-opener. And then I started reading about garbage. And I think that was a double, way more eye-opener in a sense that I'm interested, there's so much to learn about garbage, about our culture, about history, how when plastic started to exist, they had to teach people to throw away the plastic bag because people just kept it. It's not our quote-unquote nature to throw things away, but we had to learn it, and it took a long time to learn. And that's to me, I was revolted by this, And I think it's, linked with question of ecology and also the traces that we will leave in the future. All of these are, to me, I don't know, all interlinked. And I'm also interested more and more in objects. Ironically, because I work in virtual world, I think the balance is I'm interested in materiality. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anybody? Anything? Thank you. I'll be right there.
So I'm very curious because you always mention things about the reality right now and the reality in the virtual reality. But I want to know, where do you consider yourself your reality is as of this moment?
Wow, great question. Yeah, I don't know. Is that real? Is that a real question? I'm joking. I mean, I'm always questioning. Of course, this is a way to stay enchanted. I think I mentioned that, at the beginning, and it's a big, like, so to be quite honest, like recently I've been interested in witchcraft and like tarot, and like this scares people. But I'm just interested in every forms of what we consider real, and but when I'm in the moment, like here, I'm so grounded in where I am and answering your questions. So that just feels real. Yeah. So I go with the flow of that realness.
I want to give a chance for one last question. I see. Thank you.
Hi, the reference to Solaris, because I read the novel that the movie was based on, and I saw the two versions of the movie that came out, also the Soderbergh version. And I remember in some of the statements that the author was making about the ideas of the story, he's very interested in how the worlds we encounter out there are always incomprehensible to us ultimately. Like we're always encountering, when we try to make sense of them, we're ultimately always kind of like feeding our own projections right into it. It reminded me also of Marshall McLuhan's, the great Canadian media scholar who said, his maybe most famous statement on the medium is the message. And so I was thinking about this while watching some of your images and how you're exploring this idea from Stanisław Lem, the writer of Solaris, and this Marshall McLuhan idea that there's something in the media themselves that we cannot fully comprehend or put the words to. And you seem to be going into this. Is that a good way of assessing what you're trying to do?
Definitely. I mean, for me, use like technology, like using this, like images are mirror of our own projections. And like I mentioned tarot earlier, it's like my coming out of tarot. But it's, for me, these are also projection holder. And sometimes, and I think that's something that we really need as a society, let's say, to be aware of, is when we're projecting our own fear or hopes and on something, which can be technology, can be other planets and aliens, or it could be just each other's. We project so much of us on other people, and I think when we are aware of that, we have way more agency, way more freedom to change a lot of things. Because if not, we're kind of stuck in a way of seeing, and we feel like we're prisoner of that vision, and then we become a little bit like puppets. We can be controlled by someone who has an overview of things. So yeah, I think there's something key in that question of psychological projection and how we can control the way we perceive the real through these questions. Yeah.
I would like to thank you, Sabrina,
Thank you.
for taking the time to share with us your perspectives on the real, opening up our perspectives of how we integrate and can integrate the digital world into our reality. So really, thank you so much.